We all wonder if there is other life out there in the universe. In fact, many believe aliens have been observing our planet for thousands of years, citing everything from the pyramids in Egypt to the Nazca lines in Peru as evidence of contact. Now, a strange discovery in a recent NASA photo has some saying these visitors haven't just been observing Earth. Check out what we found on our next-door neighbor, Mars. In March 2006, the Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter begins its mission of studying the atmosphere and terrain of the red planet. Since then, the orbiter has taken almost 7 million pictures of the Martian surface, but it wasn't until 2021 that somebody noticed this. It's a pair of long parallel lines with indentations that lead to what appears to be a half-buried disk. And take a closer look. See that perfectly shaped crescent edge? George Haas, director of the Cydonia Institute, explains what the buzz is all about.
A South African researcher says he found what appeared to be the remains of a UFO crash. The object that he was looking at was between 12 and 15 meters in diameter, and it could be the remains of a flying disc that had crashed on the red planet.
Haas says many believe ancient civilizations, including one called the Cydonians, once thrived on the red planet.
There's been lots of evidence that there are pyramidal structures and all types of mound formations on the planet that do not look normal. One formation in particular, the famous Paratopia parrot that was taken by NASA, has over 22 points of anatomical correctness, which goes way beyond any natural formation.
But Haas believes the Cydonians vanished from Mars millions of years ago after a war that led to nuclear Armageddon. So who could this ship belong to?
For people that believe this UFO crash on Mars is a natural UFO, it may be connected to the Greys that visit our planet. They've been visiting our planet for millennia, and possibly visiting Mars also. Some believe that the Grey aliens crashed at Roswell, and they may have also lost control of one of their vehicles on Mars.
Now, we know people have been seeing alleged signs of civilization on Mars ever since this famous face was discovered in a 1976 photograph taken by Viking 1. Most of these images, including the face, were revealed to be natural geological formations once higher resolution images became available. But what about this? I mean, that clean, circular edge is pretty clear. Couldn't that really be the back edge of a flying saucer? Let's find out what our experts think. We start with astrophotographer Andrew McCarthy. For billions of years, our solar system has been bombarded with objects. Could this be a meteor that streaked from out of the sky?
Take a look at the moon. On the surface of the moon, there's a crater called Messier A. And what that is a shallow meteor impact that came in at a very shallow angle and carved out elliptical-shaped craters. This is how a normal asteroid crash would look if it comes in at a shallow angle. However, on this specific trail leading up to the object, you don't see much of that. This object itself is still intact. There is speculation that it could potentially be the heat shield off of a probe that got ejected into the Martian surface.
Since 1960, there have been around 50 attempts to send probes directly to Mars, but only about half have been successful. Is this disk the remnant of a failure?
If you look at the trench this object crashed down, it looks pretty wide and deep. To me, that rules out any kind of heat shield crash, because the heat shield from a probe wouldn't necessarily have enough energy to carve out such a trench.
So if it's not man-made, could we be looking at the remains of an alien spaceship? For that answer, we turn to NASA geologist Bob Anderson.
This area is called Candor Chasm, which is parallel to the Valles Marineris. Valles Marineris is the Grand Canyon of Mars. It's a huge rift, a crack that's 7 miles down and would go the distance of Los Angeles to New York. Valles Marineris is covered by volcanic plains, a combination of sedimentary layers and volcanic lava flows. These long streaks that you see going across the surface here, those are common all over Mars.
What looks like the trail of a crashed UFO is actually an ancient geologic crack in the surface of Mars. But if it's a natural crack, how did the object at the end of the trail get the perfect curve of a spaceship?
If you look really closely, you can see this one just happens to be perfectly arcuate here, most likely because the winds are coming over and then they're falling into the crack. And the only thing that's given everybody the idea that it's a spaceship is those dunes that are around the front that make it look like there's a circular disc.
But McCarthy isn't convinced.
To me, this object doesn't seem to have gotten here through natural processes. Its shape and the way it seemed to settle into the landscape is completely different than any other object we've seen on the Martian surface.
So it seems we have another split decision here. While Dr. Anderson's theory checks all the boxes, McCarthy's point that finding a naturally perfect curve does seem too good to be true. Our verdict? For now, until we can get a closer look and confirm what's there, we're going to go with unexplained phenomenon. And if it is a crashed UFO, we'll be the first to let you know. It's often said, if you have your ear to the ground, you'll hear everything that people are saying and doing. But as you'll hear in our next piece, if you do that on Mars, you'll be confounded with a cacophony of sounds and mystified by their origins. Some people say that the origin of this next sound, recorded by NASA, was from a Martian civilization. We say it's something you've got to hear to believe. March 6, 2019, around 2 p.m. local Mars time. The 98th Martian day or SOL of the mission for NASA's InSight lander. The spacecraft is surveying its workspace. A camera on its robotic arm is moving and snapping pictures after placing a seismometer on the surface to study Mars quakes. While it finds many, it also detects this. First, an eerie hollow noise, followed by a series of dinks and donks. Then a howl right out of a science fiction film. What could be making these strange sounds? George Haas is the director of the Cydonia Institute, which argues that ancient civilizations existed on Mars.
NASA's research with Mars found overwhelming evidence that Mars was a wet, green planet, very similar to Earth, had water, breathable air. Many people think there was a civilization that once lived there and is now extinct. So perhaps we're hearing some type of signals being sent out from Mars from the distant past. Back in 1901, Nikola Tesla claims that he had received radio signals from Mars. So possibly this is the remnant of that communication that we're hearing now.
Another possibility, and go with us for a minute, is that the sounds are emanating from within some large underground structure.
Some researchers believe that sound played a major role in the architecture and the building of the pyramids.
A passage was discovered inside the Great Pyramid of Giza, thought by some to function as an acoustic resonance tube, meaning it amplified sound vibrations from the air outside, generating infrasounds that some claim can induce otherworldly sensations. Could this have been a deliberate part of the pyramid's design? And could an alien race have constructed something similar on Mars?
There's no reason to think there couldn't have been an advanced culture on the planet that could produce structures that were similar. And what we're hearing with these odd sounds on Mars is the remnant of some structure that's been buried beneath the surface.
The nature of Mars's atmosphere means sound operates differently there. In fact, sound travels 100 meters per second slower on that planet than on Earth. Additionally, there are two speeds of sound on Mars, one for high-pitched sounds and one for low-pitched sounds. Let's see if our experts can pitch in and tell us what we're hearing here. First, audio forensic analyst Ed Primo helps us determine if this sound could be a fake, and he comes to a quick conclusion.
I found the recording in question on the NASA website, so I believe this is a genuine recording.
He proceeds to compare the sound to the first potential match, Mars quakes, which are frequent and well documented.
The frequency range on the quake is below 100 hertz across the board. The recording in question goes up much higher than that, about 400 to 1,000 hertz. So I can safely rule out this sound being a quake.
Next, physicist Matthew Shadagas digs into the extinct civilization signal theory.
Some people have hypothesized that this is some sort of alien we are hearing. However, Mars has not been what we would consider habitable for billions of years. The Martian atmosphere is extremely thin, and it doesn't have significant quantities of atoms or molecules necessary for life, for example, oxygen. Even if we consider life forms that don't require oxygen, such as anaerobic bacteria, an advanced intelligent civilization existing on Mars is very unlikely. It is possible there are structures buried under the surface of Mars, especially as it's a desert, but this just seems very far-fetched to me, and I think this is something else.
NASA geologist Dr. Bob Anderson, who actually works on the Mars missions, has a theory. He thinks the sound was made by NASA's InSight lander itself.
Because of the high technology of the seismometer, that's what we're actually picking up here. The vibration of the arm moving, wind blowing, the sand around, the vibration of those particles pushing across the soil.
Our verdict? Wind and the movement of the spacecraft itself. While this NASA mission has provided great data for scientists and even greater fodder for ufologists, it is expected to cease functioning by the end of the year. But not us. We'll keep an eye and an ear and a seismometer out for any more Martian discoveries. For nearly 50 years, NASA has been sending satellites to Mars to photograph the surface of the red planet. But what if those photographs found proof of a lost civilization there? A civilization some believe may have also colonized Earth. For decades, we've been sending probes to Mars, and ever since, strange images have been captured on the surface of the red planet. Could this be a floating spoon? Or this, a statue? What about this? The face of a god? But then, in the spring of 2020, things got really strange when an amateur astronomer claimed the cameras on the Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter photographed this. Take a closer look. It appears to be a group of buildings and pyramids on Mars, one even in the shape of an eagle's head. George Haas is the director of the Esoteric Cydonia Institute. He believes this could be evidence of an ancient civilization on Mars.
The first structure to get my attention is this four-sided pyramid that has a conjoined mound at the top. These are large geoglyphic formations that show intelligent design. All kinds of formations that appears to be a city.
George also believes these Martian pyramids are eerily similar to the ancient Mayan pyramids in Mexico.
It looks a lot like the Pyramid of the Moon in Teotihuacan. You have a four-sided pyramid with this platform or porch that's jutted off the one end of the pyramid. And they're almost identical.
Forensic investigator Chase Klotsky says there's a case to be made for past life on Mars.
There is physical evidence, scientific evidence, that there was once water on Mars. So if the water was there, it easily could have supported civilization.
So where did the Martians go? One popular theory, they were destroyed by nuclear war. The possible evidence? Atmospheric traces of an element called Xenon-129.
Xenon-129 is a signature of artificial nuclear explosions.
A 1-megaton bomb can completely level a radius of nearly 4 miles. But before we mourn the annihilation of Martian civilization, let's determine if there was a civilization at all. We took these photos to the best in the field, Mars mission planner Jonathan Hill. Hill begins by examining the large eagle's head structure. Could that be by design?
We see cliff faces along the edge, nice gentle slopes that are consistent with ice deposits that we see on similar mesas throughout the planet.
Hill says those lines indicate a natural formation, and geological analysis of the area confirms it.
So using ground-penetrating radar from orbit, we can see down into different layers of these mesas to see what they're made out of. And the entire mesa is rock and water ice, and so that obviously rules out any artificial metals or other materials.
But what about the nearby pyramid? George Haas claims it's a mirror image of the Pyramid of the Moon in Mexico. Were the two built by the same hands?
When you look at it, the difference between an actual pyramid is that all the angles are perfect. They were artificially engineered. When you look at a mesa like this, the edges aren't straight, they're all curves. The top is not centered. The geometry is just not there.
After years of studying the red planet and claims of amazing structures there, Hill believes there's a psychological explanation for what people think they are seeing on Mars, the phenomenon known as pareidolia.
It's basically where the human brain goes a little too far, and it implants patterns where patterns don't exist. And so I think people have to really prove to themselves that they're not being affected by this known effect.
So it's simply a trick of the eye. And turns out that sometimes we'll see things we want to see and not what's actually there. So our verdict? Pareidolia. But don't let that stop you from looking up at the stars for that alien life. We may still find the proof one day. When Apollo 11 touched down on the moon, Neil Armstrong famously said, "The Eagle has landed." Now one recent image from Mars has people asking, are there already birds on the red planet?
At an altitude of about 12 kilometers from the surface of Mars.
March 2021.
Heat shield set. Skycrane maneuver has started, about 20 meters off the surface.
Tango Delta.
Touchdown confirmed. Perseverance safely on the surface of Mars.
After a dramatic landing on Mars, NASA's Perseverance rover is looking for signs of ancient life, either primitive forms of bacteria or strands of DNA. To get its bearings, it takes a panorama of 4 images, and in the 3rd frame, it snaps this. A bizarre object appears suspended over the Martian surface. Zoom in, and it's clearly something thin and elongated, seemingly out of place. Just minutes after NASA downloads the image, social media lights up with posts about aliens and UFOs.
Zooming into the image, you can see its shape really closely resembles a bird in flight.
Let's not just take McCarthy's word for it. Here's a bird in flight on Earth. We pixelate it to the same degree as the Perseverance image, and we put it slightly out of focus. Practically a match, right? Percival Lowell, America's preeminent astronomer of the early 1900s, studied Mars with a telescope for 15 years. Lowell saw lines on the surface and grew convinced that they were irrigation canals to transport water from melting polar ice. He took this as evidence of intelligent life on the red planet. In the 1960s, the Mariner missions captured detailed images of the surface, and it turned out that Lowell's canals were actually a string of craters. But at least part of Lowell's theory has been proven true. In 2008, NASA's Phoenix Mars lander discovered ice under the Martian surface. So the possibility of life on Mars isn't out of the question. The Perseverance rover is the largest astrobiology expedition ever launched by NASA. Did it find proof of Martian life within weeks of touchdown? Let's check in with NASA geologist Bob Anderson. First, is this all a hoax?
You can tell that this is a real Martian image because the sky is not blue, it's yellow, which is exactly what you would see on the surface of Mars.
Dust particles in the Martian atmosphere are high in iron oxide, which absorbs blue light and creates a yellow sky. So what about an aircraft? Believe it or not, a helicopter named Ingenuity hitched a ride with Perseverance. It has successfully flown on Mars at least 11 times. So could Ingenuity be what's in the picture?
You see the shape of it, it's a very distinct box with 4 legs from it, with the propellers that are turning. And you don't see any of those features in this object here. If you take a look at this object in real close, it's more of an elliptical shape, and so it's very indicative of dust particles that we've been studying on Mars with the microscope.
Winds on Mars can kick up dust storms so big we can see them on Earth. And the dust's red hue gives the planet its color. But Mars dust is electrostatic, which means it clings to everything it touches. So it likely would stick to the camera's sensor or lenses and appear on all 4 images, not just one. So Anderson has another theory.
It actually could be a foreign object from the rover itself. The rover has little blankets and things covered with gold foil to protect it from temperature, and sometimes in the wind and in the sand, those little pieces get worn off.
So, what we might be seeing is a flyaway piece of insulation or coating. It likely blew off just before the picture was taken, flew out a few feet, then dropped before the next frame. So, our verdict? We're going with Bob Anderson. It's not 100% clear, but the bird was likely a flyaway piece of the Perseverance. In 2026, SpaceX hopes to land humans on the red planet. So then we'll definitely be able to say there is life on Mars.